My name is Jacob, and I am a Norse Pagan, and today I want to talk about books. I haven't made a book video in a very long time, and I have added quite a bit to my collection, having well over 30 books across Norse paganism as well as other pagan subjects, and books I think that have helped me along my way. So today I wanted to do an updated library video to show you what I've been reading over the last year or so, and show you what I'm reading currently. With well over 35 books now in my collection, I do want to break this up into sections based on importance of at least the information I think you want to know as a viewer. I'm going to start with the actual source material, or at least the closest we have to source material that I believe you should purchase if you're interested in the Norse religion or Norse mythology. I will then move to history books, then into Norse mythology reference material, all different types of books you can reference to cross-reference information about Norse mythology. And then I'm going to dive more into third-party sources such as books written about people's personal experiences with the faith and how-to guides and steps into the Norse religion, Asatru, Heathenry, all that good stuff. And then reference material into the more magic realm of books. And then books I'm currently reading and my personal studies in the faith. And then a hodgepodge of books that I don't know where to place. So let's go ahead and get started with the books that I think are probably the ones that everyone should own when getting into Norse paganism. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Prose Edda. Already kind of mentioned in this video, you've heard me talk about it before. A lot of people are very cautious about this book. All I say is it's kind of boring to read anyways, but ultimately we wouldn't have so much of the information about certain deities, such as Njord, Skadi, and even tales like Utgard or Loki, we wouldn't know about if it wasn't for Snorri. Just proceed with caution, but definitely pick up a copy of the Prose Edda. It's something that I didn't need right away. The Poetic Edda satisfied me at first, but the Prose Edda does have a lot of stories we wouldn't know otherwise, so I do recommend picking one up. So with that, let's go ahead and move to the Poetic Edda. Obviously, I'm a big fan of Crawford's translation. One, it's cool that we have an American that translated, and I love his unbiased way of writing. He's really just trying to give you the raw facts and the raw stories. My Poetic Edda has been through a lot, which is good, which means I've read it quite a bit. I've definitely read this far more than the Prose Edda, but I do highly recommend. I mean, it's hard for me to say, you need this book, but I find it's going to be really hard for you to research into Norse mythology or the Norse religion in general if you don't have a Poetic Edda. Most of the stories of the gods, most of the information we have comes from this book. You obviously don't have to get the Crawford translation. In fact, I don't even have multiple translations myself, but I would recommend you do it because you're going to find minor differences in each translation. So definitely recommend picking up a Poetic Edda. Reference material to that, Saga of the Volsungs, also Crawford edition. I haven't read this too many times, maybe once or twice. Again, a couple more great stories, including the Saga of Ragnar Lothbrok. So if you're a fan of the Vikings TV show and you want the actual source material, definitely recommend picking this up. It's a fine read, short read. You're not going to find too much information on the religion aspect of it if you pick it up. Other than that, I do recommend picking up The Wanderer's Havamal. If you are a big fan of the Havamal in general, as an Odin follower, it's kind of hard not to, love the Havamal because it's literally 180 stanzas of Odin talking and distilling wisdom. So definitely something I recommend as an Odin follower, and really a follower of this faith. There's a lot of really good age-old advice in the Havamal. Obviously, this is in the Poetic Edda as well. It's in here. But it's such an important book that even Crawford decided to make another version of it that contains just the Havamal, some of his lecture notes, but also it has the Old Norse in there as well, which is cool. So if you actually want to have a good introduction into Old Norse, this is good because you can see the English translation alongside of it. So definitely recommend it for that, and just a wonderful edition, and Crawford signed it. So, Wanderers Havamal, great book. I love carrying it around. Love reading it. Every time you read it, you're going to pick up something different. There's also the Pocket Havamal that's sold through Hugin and Munin Publications. I don't like this translation as much. You can literally put it in your back pocket, carry it with you. This is the book I carried throughout college because I could literally just throw it in my back pocket and read it between classes. Again, if you want to pick it up, that's fine, but there's many different versions of the Havamal, and that should show you how important it is to the faith and mythology. All right, moving to other first-hand accounts. One of the best accounts we have of pre-Christian Germanic society comes from Tacitus's Germania, which is I've actually done an entire video of because it's really a short read. Like once you actually get to Germania, Like, it's like that way through the book. So I haven't read Agricola. I haven't read the reference notes in the beginning, but I've read Germania in here. And as you can see, I highlighted quite a bit. There's a lot of really great bits of information in here. Like I said, I've done a whole video on it, but highly recommend picking up. It's really cheap, and you're going to learn a lot of really good historical material on the Germanic peoples. So, this beefy boy right here, the Sagas of the Icelanders. This book, I have not read in its entirety, but if you read anything in this book, it contains Egil Saga. Egil Saga goes all the way from stories in Scandinavia to people migrating to Iceland, contains some valuable religious information, but also is just a really entertaining story, both historically and just as a story. I mean, there's talks about berserkers, shapeshifters, wars, sacrifices, offerings, gods, religion. It's a really good read. I don't know if it's going to be like top tier. You need this book, but if you've read the Poetic Edda, you've read these books over here, and you want to dive a little bit deeper into source material, Saga of the Icelanders. All right, stack number 1 is done. Stack number 2, we are talking about history. So obviously I think it's really important as someone interested in this religion and mythology to know the history of not just the Viking Age, but the pre-Christian Scandinavian and Germanic times going back as far as we can read. So I think, the more you know about it, it's just going to be better. Vikings TV show is a lot of people's introduction, but you need to read the actual history of the Vikings to understand the religion. And of course, each of these books has a small section on the religion aspect of it. So, seeing burial customs, marriage customs, and things like that, it's definitely important to know it. And it's going to, every time you read one of these books, it's going to influence your personal practice by knowing what we know from the ancestors. I mean, ancestor worship and veneration is an important aspect of this faith. And what better way to know that than to read what we know about the ancestors? So first off is History of Vikings by Gwyn Jones. As described in my first series about my Norse Pagan books, this book is incredibly boring and dry. But it has some pictures and reference material to stones, artifacts, history, battles, wars, life, death, kings, queens, all those things. So it's one of the best condensed versions of a history book I have found. I have found history books of varying sizes, but this is my favorite one. I have read it through once, and that's good enough for me. But if I need to reference history, I look at History of Viking by Gwyn Jones. Myths and Symbols of Pagan Europe. I didn't have this book the first time I did a book video, but this is one of the first books that really opened my mind. This is written by H.R. Ellis Davison, who has also written books, I think it's called A Road to Hell, which I need to get a hold of, which talks about the Norse afterlife. This talks about less of the mythological side of worship and the historical side of worship. So this really dives into burial mounds, stories, sagas, and really breaks down what it was to follow these gods and follow this practice in pre-Christian times. It also looks at both the Scandinavian, the Germanic, and the Celtic influences, and even like the Heathenry Vikings, so the Slavic influences into this religion. Highly recommend this book. It's helped me so much and has so much great information in it. So I have this little placeholder here for Beyond the North Wind. So this is a book that came out last year. I'm actually loaning it out to somebody right now to read because it is such a wonderful read. Essentially a breakdown of it. So it was written by Christopher McIntish, who is friends and colleagues with Hilmar Hilmarsson, who is the lead Gothi of the Icelandic Asatru right now, and he actually writes the foreword as well, which is really cool to read a foreword from Hilmar Hilmarsson. This book really dives deep into the history of both the ancient pre-Christian Scandinavian and Germanic religion, but it also deals with the history of modern Asatru, which is something that I haven't actually read in a lot of books. It's a really hard subject to talk about, the modern history of Asatru, because it's still happening now. So it's one of the best sources I have found for the modern history of Asatru, but also one of the best sources for really ancient history. It really tackles some hard subjects. And really it was, it even starts introducing things like shamanism, the influences of shamanism globally. Really good read. I read it in 24 hours. Couldn't recommend it enough. All right. I can't say I use this book a lot, a concise dictionary of Old Icelandic. I need to get a dictionary of Old Norse, but anytime I need reference material to even like Egil Saga or just Old Norse words in general, I do look at this book. As you can tell, it's not used that much, but I think it is important to have books on Old Icelandic, Old Norse, Old High German, and things like that. To influence your knowledge as a scholar, I think it's important to dive into the actual linguistics of the books that we're talking about. This book I have not actually read into too much, but it's Norwegian stave churches. So the reason I bought this book is because Norwegian stave churches are the direct evolution of what pagan temples would have been. Obviously, these churches were designed with Christianity in mind, but that does not stop them from having Norse influences. I mean, stave churches are hundreds of years old, and were starting to be built pretty soon after the Christianization of Scandinavia. And so you can actually find a lot of images in here that look like they reference Norse stories, including like the tales of Ragnarok, some of the hero stories. So I think it's a really cool book. It's mostly pictures. It's even got this cool postcard in here. So I really think that the pictures alone that show detailed, pictures of stave churches is worth it enough to have this book. But also I think it's important to note that yes, while Scandinavia converted to Christianity, doesn't mean all of paganism ceased to exist. It still existed in its influences into the Christian versions that it created, but also we have to understand that not everyone really converted. They said, yeah, sure, I'm a Christian, but they still practice in secrecy. So I think it's a good reminder of that. So these are interesting. So these are just magazines I have picked up. Oh my gosh, there's just so many books. So these magazines I've picked up over the last few years. Anytime I'm at the grocery store and I see them pop up, I usually try to pick them up because sometimes you can find some interesting material. So these are just reminders that as you're out and about, if you see something like National Geographic talking about Vikings, why not pick it up? Because you don't know when you're going to see it next time. And so, I mean, this entire magazine is about Viking history. It even talks about the modern recreation of a lot of, stuff, runes, the, recreation of the modern religion. So yeah, really cool. And you don't know when you're going to find these things again. So why not pick them up? Same thing with this, I've read this like one time. It's pretty good. I would argue the National Geographic version is better, but it's just I don't even know what magazine this is. Event bookazines? I don't even know what this series is, but I found it once and I picked it up because you know what? You don't know when you're going to find these things again, so why not have them as reference material along the way? Speaking of things that you don't know when you're going to find again, I can't tell you how lucky I was to see this series when it traveled across America, but to pick up this book, We Call Them Vikings. It's definitely one of the bigger book flexes I have because I know not a lot of people have this because it really was only sold when it was basically a tour of Viking artifacts that went across America, and they sold this very expensive book. And I was sitting there like, oh my gosh, I don't want to spend this kind of money, but now I'm glad I did. Because it's really hard to get a hold of this. I don't even know to what extent the English versions were printed out, because I believe these are sold in the Swedish versions at the Swedish Museum of Viking, the Swedish Viking Art Museum, Viking Artifact Museum. I'm pretty sure they still sell this, but I'm not sure if it's in English. So I just know it's very hard to get a hold of. But it is a complete tour of the archaeological artifacts that we have from the Viking Age, as well as some references to the religion, burial practices, and things like that. So, this is a crazy good book. If you can find it, it's great. But mostly, if you see something that you're like, I wonder if I'm going to see that again, you should probably just buy it because you don't know how rare some books can be. Okay, this is getting really crowded over here. Let's move into the Norse mythology books that I also own. So I own a wide array of Norse mythology books. All of these say something slightly different. And so I think it's good to read them. If you're looking into one deity, read what each of these books says, and then cross-reference and see what is similar and what is different, and see what you can actually go off of personally. I do keep a Norse fairy and folk tales book. This one's by James Shepherd. This was a gift from a friend. It's good to have. I also look forward to reading these tales to my children. So having something simple like this, one for either them to read or for me to read to them for bedtimes, but this is just a fun little book. I think it's good just to keep these around. And then I just have a wide range. I'm kind of all going to talk about these kind of together. The Norse Myths, A Guide to God and Heroes by Caroline Larrington. Viking Myths and Sagas Retold from Ancient Norse Texts by Rosalind Curvin. So I have that. Neil Gaiman's Norse Mythology. J.R.R. Tolkien's The Legend of Sigurd and Gudrun. And then Tales of Norse Mythology by Helen A. Gerber. And then Norse Myths, Viking Legends of Heroes and Gods. These are definitely sometimes I would call dime a dozen books. They all kind of cover the same subject material. Maybe Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology a little bit differently. I know this is a very popular book, but obviously this is his version of the stories. So you're not going to find as much facts, but he's just retelling a lot of stories in his own language. Obviously the same with the Legends of Sigurd and Gudrun. This was an incompleted work by J.R.R. Tolkien, eventually completed by Christopher Tolkien. But yeah, books like Viking Myths and Sagas Retold from Ancient Norse Texts. This book is a dime a dozen. You see these all the time. No offense to the authors and the creators. It's still a pretty book. But I like looking at this, looking at the Norse Myths by Caroline Larrington, looking at Helen A. Gerber's book, and then cross-referencing everything. If you own just one of these, I can't give you one or the other. They all kind of have the same pros and cons. But I think anytime you see a Norse myth book, why not pick it up? That way you can cross-reference things. But I'm starting to see these things everywhere, and they all generally say the same thing. So why not pick them up? But I'm starting, when I do see them, I look to see if they have anything unique about them, and then I kind of toss them, deciding whether I decide to purchase them or not, because they're all over the place at this point, which is good. I'm glad Norse mythology is picking up an interest, but very rarely do I find one that adds to the conversation in a unique way. Speaking of unique ways and adding to the conversation, let's talk about the religious aspect of it. So a lot of people have guides out there to Asatru, Norse Paganism, and Heathenry. Again, there's starting to become a lot of them, and everyone likes to add their own personal voice to it. And I can't possibly cover all those books in one video, but you're going to have to decide what works best for you. And I think these are good guides to keep around, but by no means should you reference only one book. Just like how I don't think you should reference just my channel, this channel is kind of my own version of one of these books. I have my own way that I have found this religion. I have found my own way of practicing it by reading all of these, watching videos, and having my own personal experiences. So, have multiple sources, watch my videos, read these books, but don't just have one source. And don't let anyone tell you that there's just one source. But I've had this for a long time. While I have issues with Patricia Lafayelle's book, Practical Heathen Guides to Asatru, I have found information in here that has helped me out along the way. But obviously she doesn't practice the same way I do, just like Matthias Nordvik doesn't practice the same way I do, just like J.T. Thomason doesn't practice the same way I do, just like you don't practice the same way I do, and all these people do. But I think it's really good to have these books to see how other people practice, how they perceive, how they have experienced. That way it can influence your own practices. So once again, Practical Heathen's Guide to Asatru, some really good information on the holidays and certain deities. A Asatru for Beginners by Matthias Nordvik. I really actually like this book. It's really well made. Has a lot of good, it's actually color printed, which is a rare thing to have a book that's actually color printed because it's more expensive. And really concise information. But, when it comes to the more crazy aspects of the faith, you're not going to find it in here. I will get to that here in a bit. So Matthias is a PhD in this, so obviously he's going to come from more of a historical angle, where Patricia Lafayette is going to come from more of a practice standard. And this is actually The Soul of the North. I've talked about this book before by J.D. Thomason. It's very short, but some great artwork in here. And again, this comes from more of the Icelandic Asatru angle. So again, let these influence your personal practice, but don't just follow one of them. I didn't know where to throw this book. I really enjoy it. I've loaned this out quite a few times, so it's actually gotten a little rough around the edges. It's called The God's Own County by the Heathens of Yorkshire, I believe. And it's a bunch of heathen prayers for various deities. And some of them are really good. So I think it's a really good reference material if you're looking to create your own rituals, if you're looking to create your own poetry. It has some wonderful little artwork in it as well. I've talked to them a little bit, really great group of people. I don't think they've made a lot of money off these things, so I think it's really good to support other people in their faith. And like I said, they're going to have their own way of doing things, their own prayers. Well, why not let it help you in your personal practice? All right. So let's move over to some magic. So I put rune books in here because obviously runes are a very subjective thing. While they do have set things that tie to each rune, there are so many different rune books out there. I will link up above my rune video that gives 10 different rune books. I haven't necessarily read them all, but just to show you there's so many different ways to interpret the runes, and just there's so many people that have written books on the runes. So I like this one. This one is cut and dry. It's beautiful. It's made by the Icelandic Magic Company, and it is rune on page with explanation of rune. So I kind of like it. It's very, if you want a very boiled down rune experience, this is a really good reference book. Whereas this is more common to what you will find, Runes for Beginners by Lisa Chamberlain. You'll find a lot of books like this, just like you'll find a lot of Norse mythology books, just like you'll see a lot of reference books for Asatru, Heathenry, Norse Paganism. You'll find a lot of rune books. They will have different ways to pull runes, different ideas, and like different definitions of some of the runes. And that quite frankly comes because some people sit down and they'll study a rune for years and find out more information about it, and then they write it down and share it. That's fine, and that's great, but remember, don't just own one rune book. Own multiples, explore the runes yourselves and see what works best for you and see what comes to you. I just got this book, haven't dug into it, but I'm looking more into Norse magic and what it is, because again, you're not going to find that in the source material. You're not going to hear about magic a lot, but you will hear about it a lot in the community. So I'm trying to figure out, what is Norse magic? Is it real? Does it work? So I'm starting to look more into Norse magic. This one's by DJ Conaway. I recently just picked this up. Haven't dug into it, but obviously I'll actually slide this over here for right now, and you'll see why. Sorcerer's Screed. You've heard me talk about this before if you've read my previous books. This is also made by the Icelandic Magic Company. And this is a scary book, because this deals with some magics that you should definitely not try to comprehend, because it talks about certain blood things. But if you want, it also has some of the references to like the Vegvisir, the Helm of Awe. So yeah, it's got all kinds of weird, funky designs in here, and I have trouble recommending this book. It's a pretty book. It definitely is pretty, but the author is definitely probably crazy and insane. There's the original manuscript. This author is a little crazy, and so again, just be cautious if you're looking into magic like I'm starting to get into. I mean, pick it up, pick up a lot of magic books. Just proceed with caution. All right, we're getting into the funky territory now. So this pile of books is stuff I'm looking into now. So you have a weird hodgepodge of things, but these are books I haven't necessarily read to their entirety, but they are good enough to recommend currently. Like I said, I'm looking more into Norse magic. Haven't really fully read that book yet. I just picked this one up, so here we'll talk about. So I'm actually beginning to look into Celtic paganism. And so I have picked up a few Celtic pagan books. This one is massive. Edin McCoy, I think, is the author. And it has so much information in it about Celtic deities, as well as, I mean, it's just a really well printed book. There's a lot in here. Smells pretty good. And I also picked up the Celtic Myths and Legend book, the Mammoth Book of Celtic Myths and Legends by Peter Beresford Ellis. And really haven't dove into these yet, but I am starting to look into Celtic paganism, and as we'll see in a little bit more Slavic paganism, to help influence the Norse pagan practices I have, because they're so similar. But also it's just really fascinating, and there's some good stuff. You know, I will probably always call myself some form of Norse pagan, in the sense that I do tend to follow the Norse deities pretty exclusively. But why not learn from other, you know, cultures, other religions? You know, I even have more books in here. We'll talk about that in a bit. But Celtic paganism and Celtic mythology and magic are so closely related to Norse practices. Why not look into them? They may influence your current practice. So I have picked up quite a few books from them. And then I also have these two books, which are kind of into my more spiritual magic practice now. So I've read this pretty in-depthly, the Shamanic Germany, the Shamanic Journey. So I'm getting into shamanic practices. Now I should say, I haven't really publicly said this in the video, I'm by no means saying that I am a shaman or I am looking to become a shaman, but I am looking into shamanic practices to help my current explorations into the faith. So this book has been a pretty good one. It's not the best written book. It's a little basic in its like language structure, but it's still got it's got good practices in it. It's got, you know, exercises you can do and gives you a basic rundown of shamanic practice. This one's a little loosey-goosey, but I've actually really enjoyed this book. It's called The Misfilled Path by Frank McEwen, and it's about this guy's personal practice into Celtic shamanic practices. It's literally called The Misfilled Path: Celtic Wisdom for Exiles, Wanderers, and Seekers. Like, that's just it's got me all written all over it. So I picked it up. It's been a really great read. It talks about the different realms, the different worlds, the gods, and how we interact with them, how we get into a spiritual mindset. So it's been a really enjoyable read, and I would definitely recommend picking up just for a good read, but also something to help expand your mind. And that brings us to this hodgepodge stack of books I didn't know how to categorize. So on the top of my list, I actually have my personal journal. It's fun. I mean, it's a book, so technically it counts for this video. But I think it's really important to have your own journal and your own spiritual guidebook. So when you figure out something for yourself, you just write it down. I don't really have any intention of publishing this, but you know, rituals I work out, rituals I learn from others, experiences I have, I record in here, and I think it's important for everyone to have some form of book they record their personal journey into. That way, you know, you can look back, see how far you've learned, or you know, if you forget about something, you won't forget about it. So definitely recommend having your own personal journal. Who doesn't like leather-bound books? So I have this wee little book written by a good friend, Jason Rawls, who I just recently did a Know Your Folk episode with. I'll link it above, of course. But I put this in here to remind us there are a lot of really funky books we really can't necessarily label in any certain category, but we have people in this community, in the heathen, Norse Pagan, Asatru community, which are writing books. He self-published this book, and it's just a poetry book about his personal oath to Odin. That's cool. I'm glad people, I mean, just like this channel, just like reference books, just like this book, people are starting to share their experiences in the old ways in new and funky formats. So I definitely recommend supporting artists and writers and creators that, you know, create their own books, especially self-published. So yeah, The Oath, A Heathen Poet's Journey by Jason Rawls. It's really cool that we have creators in this community creating such things. Okay, so let's see here. How do I want to go about this? Okay, so I threw these in here. One, because I recommended this in my first 12 favorite Norse Pagan books, but also as a friendly reminder that Odin was a wanderer and traveled all over the world, all over Midgard, to explore and gather wisdom and knowledge from all corners of this earth. Do not close yourself off to just Norse paganism. Explore different things. So, you know, one of the things I really love looking into is Native American spiritual practice, mostly because there are so many connections I see personally amongst the Native American beliefs and the Norse pagan beliefs, especially in shamanism. Much respect to the Native American culture. And I ended up doing an interview with Lakota, with someone who is Lakota and follows the Lakota beliefs and the Norse pagan beliefs. So definitely recommend checking that out. It's on the Folk Podcast, episode 20. I'll put it up above because I can't remember the name of the episode, the number of the episode, but it was a really good conversation, and we're starting to see a lot more connections, or at least I am personally, with Native American beliefs. So Black Elk Speaks, definitely recommend reading it. Just a really good eye-opening book into the spiritual beliefs of the Native Americans. And then we have Beyond Religion by the Dalai Lama. So this is actually one of the books that inspired me to get into Norse paganism when I was a practicing Buddhist. Wander like Odin did. I mean, stay true to your beliefs and your gods, but why not try to find knowledge and experiences from other people's stories, not just Norse pagans. The world will never be 100% Norse pagan. It'll never be 100% pagan or any one variant of pagan ever. It's never been that way, and it will never be that way. We will live side by side with people of various religious beliefs, so why not learn from them? So definitely recommend picking up books from various religious beliefs. Okay. All right, this one's a little fun. So I've been trying to learn German, and so I've been getting a collection of German written books about Vikings and Norse pagans. This is just kind of fun. So Sigurd und die starken Frauen. Sorry, my German's crap. But this is a German children's book about Vikings. About like Viking women that go on raids, and like they're they stay behind, the women go raid, and there's a bunch of berserkers that come attack the village and take over the village. It's just a fun little story. Wo fast und 50 Jahren wurden auf der Straße Insel Brocken ein großen Wegensgraben windig. Dorting, I can't speak German that well. In a more serious note, there is a lot of Norse knowledge and Norse history knowledge and religion knowledge, mythology knowledge that has never been translated into English, and I find this to actually be more common. So just keep an eye out for books that are written in other languages that might actually influence your practice and might actually pay to learn that language. Like in Ich Odin und die beiden Vikinger. This is a book, it's more intermediate, but it's written in, of course, all German about the various gods in the Norse and Germanic pantheon. So they're actually, if I actually learned German enough, there might be some information in here I didn't know, because there tends to be a lot of information that has not been translated yet. So look forward to hopefully learning more German. But it's really cool to, own these books for hopefully the one day I actually speak German. All right, so the last books, because I'm assuming most people have tuned out by this point because it's a long video, but this is more of a personal thing and something that I'm finding that is more common in Norse Pagan books collection is being stewards of old books. So I'm really big in collecting vintage books. I've read from this book. This book is nearly 200 years old, and I think it's important to become stewards of old things in the old world. This is an old poetry book, obviously not pagan, but it's a book about poetry and the seasons. And again, nearly 200 years old. Most recently, a friend purchased a book that was nearly 300 years old. So, why not become stewards of old things? Are we not just trying to venerate old ways? So let's venerate old books, and keep them protected, keep them safe, and let them, stay in our book collections. And then we have this cool book. Because, we like cool things. We collect bones, we collect rocks, we collect shiny things. Let's collect old books. That might not necessarily be pagan, but this one I'm finding out might be a little bit more pagan than I realized. So this book, I have no idea what it's called. All I know is it has a dope cover. It was written in what I thought was Russian, but I think it's Ukrainian from what I've been told. And then it's cool. Look at that. It was written in the 80s, which is younger than I thought it would be. But it's like, that's cool. That's cool. I mean, if I know anything about Slavic, I found out that this is written, it's a Slavic tale from like the 12th or 11th century or something like that. So a little bit more connected than I realized. And from what I know about Slavic religion, could this not be dope? Could this not be Veles within the Slavic tales? It's an old man, cool stuff around it. Who knows? But yeah, I mean, this is just a really cool book that I will probably never be able to read. But why not try to preserve such beautiful forms of art within literature? And plus, since it's apparently written in Ukrainian written language, but apparently in the old Slavic church language, from what I've been able to find out, that's cool, because this is a thing that's going to become very rare. So as a book collector, really cool find. So let's, be good stewards of old books and old things as we try to venerate the old ways. Oh my God! That was so many books. I own too many books now. And of course, there's a few books on audiobook that I haven't mentioned here. I can't even remember them off the top of my head. But wow, yeah, my book collection has grown quite a bit. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you for sticking with me. I hope I've inspired you to purchase some more books, to be stewards of old books, to explore different faiths and religions and wisdom and ideas to help influence the little bit of information we know about Norse paganism that so many people are starting to write about. That's cool. That's exciting. There are dozens, if not hundreds of authors now writing about Norse mythology, Viking history, and Norse religion. That's awesome. Seek wisdom in all forms. You never know what you're going to find, and you never know what's going to help you along your own way. We come from a religion and a faith and ideal of a wanderer who traveled the world, who traveled Midgard, who traveled the realms to seek wisdom from all corners of it. So I encourage you to do the same. I hope this video has been helpful, but until the hall, until we have a massive library of books in the hall, Skull. Oh, that was so many books. The series is going to be so long in a couple of years. But speaking of a couple of years, if you like the Wisdom of Odin and the content I put out here and hope to see it continue for a couple of more years, please think about donating to Patreon. Not only will you be supporting my descent into book madness, but you'll also be joining a thriving community on Discord, which is a judgment-free environment where you can ask questions and learn and share ideas with other people of similar beliefs. But you'll also be gaining access to Discord, which is a judgment-free environment where you can ask questions, make mistakes, and just learn more about this faith with dozens and hundreds of others. You'll also gain access to live streams at a different tier and early access videos at another. Thank you for watching these videos. Thank you for your support. And don't forget to like, subscribe, all those boring YouTuber things. And until the haul, Skull.